In an isolated mansion, the patriarch suspects that his wife's frailty isn't due to age, but to something hidden. A housekeeper reveals that the daughter-in-law is preventing the elderly woman from moving under the pretense of care. Amid suspicious juices and rehearsed lies, the truth begins to surface, and the silence of the house will never be the same. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. And now, on with the story. The night was getting late when Robert Anderson closed the last spreadsheet on his office computer. The clock on the wall showed it was nearly midnight, and the mansion on the Upper East Side was submerged in that heavy silence only large houses know. A silence that seemed to have weight, texture, as if the walls held secrets no one dared to speak aloud. Robert rubbed his tired eyes and thought about heading up to his bedroom, but something about the stillness kept him there, trapped between papers and numbers that no longer made sense at this hour. That's when the knocking started. It wasn't ordinary, polite knocking, the kind that announces someone with a tray of coffee. This was a desperate, insistent pounding that made the mahogany door tremble on its hinges. Robert shot up, his heart racing. Before he could say anything, the door flew open and Maria entered, or rather, burst into the office as if she were fleeing something terrible. Maria. 15 years working in this house. 15 years of silent loyalty, of coffee served at the perfect temperature, of clothes ironed with military precision. Robert had never seen her like this. Her apron was crooked, her grey hair was escaping from its usually impeccable bun, and her eyes, those normally calm and controlled eyes, were wide with pure panic. "Mr. Anderson, sir, you need to hear what I have to say." Her voice came out trembling, loaded with an urgency that allowed no delay. She glanced back at the dark hallway, as if expecting someone might be listening. Robert felt a chill run up his spine. Something was very wrong. "Maria, what happened?" He approached her, trying to sound calm, but his own voice betrayed him with a nearly imperceptible tremor. The housekeeper carefully closed the door, leaning against it, as if she needed to be sure no one else would come in. Then she began to speak, and every word that left her mouth was like a stone thrown into a glass lake, shattering the surface of normality Robert thought he knew. "It's Mrs. Helen, sir. Your mother. She's not bedridden because she's sick." Maria swallowed hard, her hands shaking. "She's being kept from moving. Mrs. Patricia, your wife is doing this to her." Robert felt the floor disappear from under his feet. The words didn't make sense. Patricia, his devoted wife who cared for her mother-in-law with such attention, the same Patricia who prepared specialty teas, who managed her medication schedule, who was always there when his mother needed her. "Maria, are you telling me my wife is mistreating my mother?" The question came out harsher than he intended. Part of him wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, an exaggeration, maybe even jealousy from the housekeeper. But another part, a part he didn't want to acknowledge, knew that Maria would never lie about something like this. Not about Mrs. Helen, not after 15 years. "I saw it, sir. I saw it with my own eyes." The housekeeper began to cry, thick tears streaming down her face, a face marked by time and work. "This afternoon I went into the room because I heard Mrs. Helen calling. She was trying to get up from her chair, holding onto the armrest, pushing herself up. And then Mrs. Patricia came in like a hurricane and grabbed her by the shoulders, pushing her back down into the seat. She said she couldn't do that, that it was dangerous, that she had to obey." Robert sat on the edge of his desk, his legs suddenly too weak to hold him. "Go on," he murmured, his voice hoarse. Maria wiped her tears with the back of her hand, but they kept coming. "Your mother said her legs felt heavy, that she felt like she couldn't move them right. And Mrs. Patricia said that was normal, that the doctor told her to stay still, that it was for the best. But, sir, I've known Mrs. Helen for 15 years. She's always been strong, active. Just a few months ago she was coming downstairs for coffee, walking in the garden, and now all of a sudden she can't even stand up." The memories began to flash through Robert's mind like a slow-motion film. When was the last time he'd seen his mother walking freely through the house? When was the last time she'd come down to have dinner with them? He tried to remember and realized, with a cold shock, that he couldn't. The weeks had turned into months without him noticing, each day the same as the last, and at some point, his mother had simply stopped appearing. Patricia always had a ready explanation. "She's tired today. The doctor recommended rest. She prefers to stay in her room. She's more comfortable that way." "How many times has this happened, Maria?" The question came out as a whisper. The housekeeper hesitated, biting her lip. "I don't know for sure, sir. I try to stay away when Mrs. Patricia is with your mother. She doesn't like me around. She always finds something for me to do in another part of the house. But for the last few weeks I've been hearing things, raised voices. Your mother asking to get up and Mrs. Patricia saying no. Today was the first time I actually saw it, and I couldn't stay quiet anymore, sir. I can't see Mrs. Helen like this. She's scared. Scared." The word echoed in the office like a scream. Helen Anderson, the woman who had raised Robert alone after his father died, the matriarch who commanded family gatherings with an iron fist and a heart of gold, was scared inside her own home. Robert felt something break inside him. How had he let this happen? How had he been so blind? "Maria, you did the right thing by telling me." He stood up, trying to regain some control over the situation. "But I need you to be discreet. Don't mention this to anyone else yet. I'm going to watch. I'm going to verify if what you're saying is true." The housekeeper nodded, still trembling. "I understand, sir. But please, take care of Mrs. Helen. She doesn't deserve this. Nobody does." With those words, Maria left the office, leaving Robert alone with his thoughts in turmoil. He didn't go up to his room that night. He stayed there in the office with the lights off, staring into the darkness through the window that overlooked the garden. His mind wouldn't stop working, replaying every recent conversation with Patricia, every time she had deflected when he asked about his mother, every explanation that had sounded perfectly reasonable, but now, in the light of this revelation, seemed to have deep cracks. Patricia. They had been married for 12 years. It wasn't a passionate marriage, it never had been. It had been a convenient, comfortable union. She was beautiful, educated, and knew how to behave at the social events his work required, and he was a good catch. A successful businessman with a mansion on the Upper East Side and a generous bank account. But true love, that deep connection that books and movies promise, it had never existed between them. And her relationship with Helen? Robert forced himself to remember. In the beginning, Patricia had been cordial, polite, even affectionate with her mother-in-law. But slowly, over the years, something had changed. Little barbs in seemingly innocent comments, glances that lasted a second longer than they should. Helen had never complained openly, but Robert remembered a few subtle conversations where she mentioned that Patricia was very controlling, too concerned with irrelevant details. He had dismissed it, chalking it up to the normal friction between a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. What kind of son am I? The thought was bitter, painful. What kind of man lets his own mother be mistreated in her own home and doesn't even notice? Robert stood up and walked to the bar in the corner of the office, pouring himself a scotch that burned on its way down, but couldn't burn away the guilt growing in his chest. The hours passed slowly. Around 3 in the morning, Robert heard footsteps in the upstairs hallway. Light, measured. Patricia moving through the house. He stood motionless, listening. The footsteps went to his mother's room, stopped for a few moments, and then moved away. What was she doing? Checking if Helen was asleep? Making sure she didn't try to get up during the night? A shiver ran through Robert's body. For the first time in 12 years, he looked up at the ceiling of his home and imagined his wife not as the partner who shared his roof, but as a stranger. A stranger wearing a mask he had never noticed was there. How many other things had he missed? How many signs had he ignored? When the first glimmer of light began to filter through the windows, heralding the dawn, Robert was still awake. His eyes burned with exhaustion, but his mind was more alert than ever. He had made a decision during those lonely hours of vigil. He would watch. He would pay attention to every detail, every word, every gesture. And if Maria was right, if his mother was truly being held prisoner in some perverse and silent way, he was going to find out. And he was going to put a stop to it. He went up to his room when he heard the first sounds of the house waking up. Patricia was still asleep, or at least pretending to be, turned to the opposite side of the bed. He took a quick shower, changed his clothes, and went down to the dining room with his heart beating faster than it should on a normal morning. For the first time in years, Robert Anderson was going to truly look inside his own home. And he was afraid of what he might find. But it was a necessary fear. It was the kind of fear that precedes courage, the kind of fear that turns a passive man into someone willing to fight. As he waited for coffee to be served, Robert thought of his mother, locked in her room upstairs. He thought of her trying to stand up and being stopped. He thought of the fear in her eyes, and he knew with a certainty that burned in his veins that he would not rest until she was free, until the oppressive silence of that house was broken once and for all. No matter the cost, no matter what he discovered. The truth, however, painful, was always better than living a lie, and Robert was about to find out just how deep that lie really was. The morning arrived at the Upper East Side mansion, with that golden light, typical of New York, streaming through the large dining room windows and painting everything with a false sheen of normality. Robert was sitting at the head of the table, his coffee cup untouched in front of him, when Patricia walked in. She was wearing a light blue dress, her hair in an elegant bun, her makeup flawless as always, the perfect picture of a devoted wife, an impeccable homemaker. "Good morning, honey." Her voice was soft, almost musical. "Sleep well?" Robert watched every micro-expression on her face as he answered with a nod. He watched the way she sat, her back straight, her movements precise. Everything so controlled, so rehearsed. How had he never noticed before that her every gesture seemed to follow an invisible script? Maria entered silently, bringing fresh bread and fruit. Robert noticed how she avoided looking directly at Patricia, how her shoulders tensed when she passed near her, small signs he had always ignored, attributing them to the natural shyness of someone who works in large homes. But now, with his eyes opened by the previous night's revelation, everything took on a different meaning. Everything seemed suspicious, loaded with ulterior motives. "How's Mom today?" The question came out casually, as Robert pretended to focus on buttering his toast. Patricia didn't even hesitate. "She's fine. Slept through the night. I'll go up soon to give her breakfast. She prefers to eat in her room. You know how she is. It's more comfortable for her that way." Robert chewed slowly, processing the answer. She prefers. Those two words, so simple, but now they sounded like a well-constructed excuse. Helen had always loved having coffee on the terrace, feeling the morning sun on her face. When had that changed? And had it really been her choice? "It's been a while since she's come down for breakfast with us." Robert kept his tone light, almost disinterested. Patricia took a sip of her tea, her delicate fingers holding the cup with studied grace. "Well, she's 78, honey. It's natural for her to prefer her room. The stairs are tiring. And besides, the doctor recommended she rest. She's in a delicate phase." "What doctor?" The question slipped out before Robert could stop himself. Patricia blinked just once, but it was enough. A flash of something crossed her eyes. Surprise? Annoyance? It was too quick for him to be sure. "Dr. Miller, of course. The geriatrician who sees your mother. He said it's best if she doesn't push herself too much. Conserve her energy. But I don't remember you going with her to any recent appointments." Patricia set her cup down with a sound too soft to be accidental. "Honey, I always go to your mother's appointments. You're the one who's always too busy with work." That was true. Robert spent more time at the office or traveling for business than at home. But that truth at that moment felt like a sharp knife being twisted against him, a reminder of how much he had been absent, how much he had delegated his mother's care to Patricia. "I think I'll go up and see how she is." Robert started to get up, but Patricia was quicker. She placed her hand gently on his, a gesture that should have been affectionate but, to his eyes now, seemed like an attempt at control. "Let me go first, honey. I need to help her with her morning routine. You know how embarrassed she gets if someone sees her like this still in her nightgown. Let me get her ready first, then you can go up, okay?" It was not okay. Nothing was okay. But Robert nodded, because he still needed to observe to confirm. He still wasn't absolutely sure. Part of him still wanted to believe that Maria had exaggerated, that there was some reasonable explanation. Patricia left the room with measured steps, carrying a tray prepared especially for Helen. Robert waited a few minutes before going upstairs, moving through the hallway with an almost ridiculous caution, as if he were an intruder in his own home. He stopped in front of his mother's bedroom door. It was ajar. Voices came from inside. Patricia's, firm and authoritarian. Helen's, weaker, hesitant. Robert leaned against the hallway wall, his heart pounding, and listened. "I've already told you not to try to get up by yourself. It's dangerous." Patricia's voice had none of the sweetness she used with him. "But I just wanted to go to the window, to see the garden." Helen's reply was almost a whisper, laced with something Robert took a second to identify: fear. His mother was afraid. "You can see the garden from here, from the bed. Now take your medicine. No, don't argue. The doctor said it's important." A silence. Then the sound of someone swallowing with difficulty. "There. Good girl. Now rest. I'm going to lock the window. There's a draft." Robert felt the blood boil in his veins. Lock the window. In the middle of a New York summer. He waited until he heard Patricia's footsteps approaching the door, then quickly moved away, heading down the stairs as if he were going to his office. He needed to think. He needed a plan. He couldn't just explode and confront her, not yet. Not without more proof. The day dragged on like torture. Robert pretended to work, but his mind was upstairs with his mother. Around 3 in the afternoon, when he knew Patricia was at the gym, he made his move. He went up the stairs silently, knocked gently on Helen's door. "Come in." The voice came weakly from inside. The room was shrouded in gloom. The heavy curtains blocked most of the light. Helen was sitting in an armchair near the bed, wearing a light, blue silk robe that seemed too big for her. Robert's chest tightened. When had his mother become so small, so frail? "Hi, Mum." He walked in, forcing a smile. "Came to keep you company." Helen's eyes lit up, but there was something else there, a shadow of anxiety. "Robert, it's so good to see you. Are you okay?" She glanced nervously at the door. "Did Patricia leave?" Robert closed the door and pulled up a chair, sitting close to her. "She's out. It's just us. How are you, Mom?" "Really?" Helen hesitated. "I'm fine, son. Just a little tired." Robert took her hand. It was cold. "Mom, you can be honest with me. Are you okay? Are you comfortable here? Do you need anything?" Helen opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Her eyes began to well up with unshed tears. "I just wish I could walk a little, Robert. My legs are getting weak. I feel a heaviness, a numbness. But Patricia says I can't push it, that it's dangerous." "Did the doctor really say that?" Robert tried to keep his voice gentle. Helen bit her lip. "Patricia said he did. I haven't spoken directly with Dr. Miller in a few months. She schedules the appointments, goes with me, talks to him. Then she tells me what he said." Robert felt something tighten in his chest. "And you don't find that strange?" "I don't know what to think anymore, son." Helen's voice broke. "Sometimes I try to stand up just to take a few steps to feel the floor under my feet. And she appears out of nowhere, holds me, says I'm going to fall, that I'll hurt myself. And I get scared, Robert. I get scared that I really will fall, that I'll be a burden to you both." The tears finally streamed down her wrinkled face. "But I'm also scared of being like this forever, trapped in this room, not even able to look out the window." "Mom, you are not a burden. You never have been, and you never will be." Robert squeezed her hand tighter. "And we're going to fix this. I'm going to talk to the doctor. I'm going to understand what's happening. Can you trust me?" Helen nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her free hand. "But don't start a fight with Patricia because of me, son. She's your wife. I don't want to cause trouble in your marriage." That broke Robert's heart. His mother, even scared and frail, was still worried about not causing problems. "Mom, Your well-being is my priority. It always has been and always will be. Now tell me something. When was the last time you walked by yourself without anyone holding you? Helen thought for a long moment. I think it's been about 3 months, maybe 4. Patricia started getting more watchful after I tripped on the rug. It was just a silly trip, I didn't even fall, but she got very worried, said I could have broken my hip, that people my age never recover from that, and ever since then she insists I stay seated or lying down. She says it's for my own good. Robert felt the anger rise, hot and dangerous, but he controlled himself. Mom, I'm going to take care of everything, trust me. He stood up, kissed her forehead. But do me a favor. If at any point you feel you're in danger, if Patricia does anything that scares you, call for Maria. She'll let me know. Understood? Helen nodded, but her face was pale. Robert, you think she's doing this on purpose, keeping me here? The question hung in the air like a terrible accusation. Robert didn't know what to answer. Not yet. I'm going to find out, Mom. I promise. He left the room with more questions than answers. In the hallway, he found Maria changing the towels in the bathroom. The housekeeper looked at him with an expression that mixed hope and fear. Did you talk to her, sir? Robert nodded. We talked, and you were right, Maria. Something is very wrong here. What are you going to do? Her voice was an urgent whisper. Robert looked down the stairs toward the front door below. I'm going to call the doctor. I'm going to find out the truth. And if Patricia is really doing what I think she is, I'm going to end it, whatever the price. Maria took a deep, relieved breath. Mrs. Helen is a good woman, sir. She doesn't deserve to suffer like this. Robert agreed with a nod and went downstairs, heading straight for his office. He closed the door, picked up the phone, and dialed Dr. Miller's office. The receptionist answered with that professional, distant voice. I'd like to speak with Dr. Miller, please. It's urgent. It's about my mother, Helen Anderson. There was a pause, the sound of keys being typed. Mr. Anderson, Mrs. Helen's last appointment was 6 months ago. The doctor tried to get in touch a few times to schedule a follow-up, but your wife always cancelled, saying the patient was doing fine. Robert felt the ground shake beneath his feet. 6 months? But my wife said the doctor was monitoring her regularly, that he had recommended rest. The receptionist hesitated. Sir, I have no record of any such recommendation. At her last visit, Dr. Miller suggested that Mrs. Helen do physical therapy and light walking. She had some muscle weakness, but nothing that would justify complete bed rest. In fact, he was concerned when he couldn't reach her. Robert hung up the phone with trembling hands. So it was true. Patricia had lied. She had invented non-existent medical orders. She had kept his mother isolated, weakened, and afraid. And all this time, he hadn't noticed a thing. Absolutely nothing. The guilt was a crushing weight, but the anger was even greater. What kind of person did this? What kind of monster was hiding behind that perfect facade of a devoted wife? He heard the front door open. Patricia was back from the gym. Robert took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. He couldn't confront her yet. He needed more. He needed to understand the extent of what was happening. He walked out of the office with a forced smile on his face. Hey, honey, how was the gym? Patricia smiled back, that perfect smile that now looked like a hideous mask. It was great. I'm going to take a shower and then I'll go up to see how your mother is. Always so dedicated, aren't you? The comment came out with a hint of sarcasm that Robert couldn't completely hide. Patricia tilted her head, her eyes narrowing just a fraction. Of course. Your mother needs care. It's my duty as her daughter-in-law. And with that she went up the stairs, leaving Robert alone in the entrance of the mansion that suddenly felt like a prison. A beautiful, luxurious prison, but a prison nonetheless. And upstairs, in the locked room, his mother was the prisoner. Robert clenched his fists. This was going to end. It had to end, and it was going to end soon, even if it meant he had to destroy everything he thought he knew about his own life. Night fell on the Upper East Side mansion like a heavy curtain, bringing with it that silence Robert now recognized as artificial, forced, a silence maintained by carefully constructed secrets and lies. He had spent the day observing, mentally noting every detail, every interaction, and the more he watched, the clearer it became that Maria hadn't exaggerated. If anything, she had been too discreet. The situation was worse than he had imagined. Around 9 o'clock, when Patricia went up to their bedroom complaining of a headache, Robert went down to the kitchen. Maria was finishing up the last of the dishes, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She turned when she heard his footsteps, looking startled for a moment until she recognized him. "Mr. Anderson," he gestured for her to sit at the kitchen table. "We need to talk, for real, no fear, no holding back." Maria sat down slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them on the table. "I already told you what I saw, sir." Her voice was a tired whisper. "But there's more, isn't there?" Robert leaned forward. "There are things you haven't told me yet, because you're scared. Scared of losing your job, scared of Patricia, am I right?" Tears began to stream down the housekeeper's wrinkled face before she could even answer. "Yes, sir. There's so much more. And I should have told you sooner, but I was so scared. I need this job. I'm a widow. My son's in college. I can't lose this job." Robert took her hand, squeezing it firmly. "Maria, you're not going to lose anything. You did the right thing by telling me. Now I need you to be completely honest with me. What else have you seen?" Maria wiped her tears with the back of her hand and took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into deep water. "Some days I hear Mrs. Helen calling for help, quietly, afraid of being heard. But when I go to her, the door is locked from the outside. From the outside, sir, as if she were a child who needs to be put in time out. And when I ask Mrs. Patricia if I can open it, she says it's for her safety, that your mother might try to leave and fall down the stairs. But that's not it, that's not it." "What else?" Robert's voice was controlled, but inside he was seething. "A week ago I saw Mrs. Patricia grabbing your mother's arm. It wasn't a caring touch, sir. She was squeezing, hard. It left purple bruises. And when Mrs. Helen complained of pain, your wife said she was exaggerating, that it was just because an elderly person's skin is fragile. But I saw it. I saw the force she used. It was on purpose." Robert's stomach turned. "And have you seen anything else like that, other marks?" Maria nodded miserably. "Some days I see bruises on her arms, always in the same places, like someone is holding her down to force her to stay still. And Mrs. Helen gets so quiet when Mrs. Patricia is around. She's like a frightened little bird. She only talks to me when she's sure your wife isn't listening." "How long has this been going on?" Maria thought, her brow furrowed. "It started slowly, about 8 months ago. At first it was just overprotectiveness, you know. Mrs. Patricia wouldn't let her do anything by herself. Then it got worse. She started giving her medicines I'd never seen before. Strange liquids with a bitter taste. Mrs. Helen would complain, but Mrs. Patricia said they were from the doctor, and I, like an idiot, believed her. We always believe our employers, don't we, sir? We have to believe them." Robert stood up, pacing the kitchen. His brain was working at high speed, connecting the pieces. "Maria, these liquids, do you know where she keeps them?" The housekeeper hesitated. "I think in her suite's bathroom, in the cabinet. Sometimes I see her taking them there after giving them to your mother." Robert made a decision. "I need to see that medicine. I need to know what she's giving my mother." "But sir, if she finds out you went through her things—" "I don't care," Robert cut in, his voice hard. "This has gone on long enough. My mother is being poisoned, manipulated and hurt inside her own home, and I'm not going to stand by and wait for it to get worse." Maria stood up too, wiping her face. "Then let me help. I know when she's in a deep sleep. I can show you where everything is. But you have to be careful, sir. Mrs. Patricia is smart. She notices when things are out of place." Robert nodded. "Then we'll do it together. But first I'm calling Dr. Miller. I need him to come here tomorrow morning, before Patricia can invent some excuse. He needs to examine my mother and tell me exactly what's going on." Maria agreed with a nod. "Yes. With the doctor as a witness, she won't be able to lie." That night, Robert called the doctor's office and left a message on the answering machine, requesting an urgent house call. Then he went up to his room, his heart pounding. Patricia was already asleep, or pretending to be. He stayed awake for hours, waiting, listening to her steady breathing, making sure she was truly in a deep sleep. Around 2 in the morning, He got up carefully and left the room. Maria was waiting for him in the hallway, still dressed, her eyes red from exhaustion and tension. The master bathroom was large and luxurious. Robert opened the cabinet slowly, his hands shaking slightly. There were dozens of bottles, perfumes, creams, medicines. Maria pointed to a dark bottle in the back, almost hidden behind other products. That's it. I've seen her get that one several times. Robert picked up the bottle carefully. It was amber glass, unlabeled, filled with a dark liquid that had a strange smell when he opened the cap. Too sweet, but with a bitter, almost metallic undertone. "What is this?" he whispered, more to himself than to Maria. "I'm not sure, sir, but I know that after Mrs. Helen takes it, she gets groggy, sleepy, and her legs seem to get even heavier." Robert closed the bottle and put it in his robe pocket. "I'm keeping this. The doctor needs to analyze it." Maria nodded, then pointed to another shelf. "There's one more thing, sir. There's a little notebook there. I've seen Mrs. Patricia writing in it a few times." Robert picked up the notebook. It was small, with a black leather cover. When he opened it, he felt his blood run cold. It was a log. Doses, times, reactions. It was all documented. 8 a.m., 3 drops in juice. Drowsiness in 30 minutes. 10 p.m., 5 drops in tea. Initial agitation, then stillness. It was like a scientific journal of someone conducting experiments. Experiments on a human being. On his mother. "My God!" Robert's voice came, out hoarse, broken. "She's really doing it. She's drugging my mother on purpose." Maria began to cry silently. "I knew it, sir. Deep down, I knew it. But I was so afraid to speak up and have no one believe me. Who's going to believe the maid over the lady of the house?" Robert put the notebook in his pocket with the bottle. "I believe you, and tomorrow, when the doctor comes, everyone will believe you." They returned to their rooms in silence, each carrying the weight of that horrific discovery. Robert didn't sleep a wink for the rest of the night. He lay next to his wife, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how he had gotten to this point. How had he married a woman capable of this? What signs had he missed? What monster was sleeping beside him? The dawn brought a cruel clarity that illuminated every corner of the mansion. Robert had coffee alone, his stomach too twisted to eat anything. At 9 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. It was Dr. Miller, a man in his 60s with grey hair and a perpetually concerned expression. "Robert, good to see you. I got your message. You said it was urgent." "It is, Doctor. It's about my mother. I need you to examine her, and I need you to be honest with me about what you find." The doctor frowned. "Of course. But what's going on?" Robert took a deep breath. "Let's go upstairs. I'll explain on the way." As they climbed the stairs, Robert summarized the situation. The doctor listened with an increasingly grave expression, shaking his head in disbelief. When they reached Helen's room, Patricia was there, feeding her mother-in-law breakfast. She turned upon seeing the two men, and for a split second Robert saw something flash across her face, panic. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that controlled smile. "Dr. Miller, what a surprise. We didn't know you were coming today." Helen, sitting in the armchair, looked at her son with eyes wide with hope. "I asked the doctor to come," Robert said, his voice firm. "I thought it was time for a house call since Mom hasn't been to the office." Patricia blinked, her smile faltering just a bit. "But I always take her to her appointments." Dr. Miller opened his bag, taking out his stethoscope. "Actually, Mrs. Anderson, Helen's last appointment was 6 months ago, and at the time I did not recommend complete bed rest, quite the contrary." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Patricia opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "There must be some mistake. I'm sure you said—" "There was no mistake," the doctor cut in, his voice professional but with a hint of irritation. "And I'm quite concerned by what I'm hearing now. Helen, do you mind if I run a few basic tests?" Helen nodded, her eyes fixed on her son. The doctor began the examination. He checked her blood pressure, heart rate, reflexes. Then he asked her to try to stand. Helen pushed, but her legs trembled violently. I can't do it, doctor. It feels like I have no strength. Dr. Miller jotted something on his notepad. This is muscle atrophy. It happens when a person remains immobile for too long. But Helen, the last time I examined you, you were in excellent physical condition. What happened? Before Helen could answer, Robert pulled the bottle from his pocket. Maybe this explains it, doctor. My wife has been giving this liquid to my mother. She says it's medicine you prescribed. The doctor took the bottle, opened it, sniffed. His face went pale. This is not a prescribed medication. It seems to be some kind of homemade sedative, possibly with herbs that cause drowsiness and muscle weakness. Where did you get this? All eyes turned to Patricia. She had backed away until she was against the wall, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. I don't know what you're talking about. This is absurd. Robert pulled out the notebook as well. And this, Patricia? This detailed journal of how much and when you gave these substances to my mother? Is this absurd, too? Patricia looked at the notebook and something inside her broke. The perfect mask began to crack. You don't understand. No one understands. She always had everything. She was always the center of attention. The great Helen Anderson, the matriarch. And me? I was just the daughter-in-law, the wife who was never good enough, who was never truly accepted into this family. Robert took a step forward, his anger overflowing. So you decided to poison her? To keep her prisoner? Patricia laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Poison her? I was just making sure she didn't take you away from me, that she didn't take this house from me. She always had you wrapped around her little finger, Robert, always. And I was sick of being second best, sick of hearing how wonderful your mother was, how she raised you all by herself, how strong she was. I wanted her to stop, that's all. I wanted her to be quiet. Helen, who had heard everything from her armchair, asked in a trembling voice, You hate me? That much? Patricia turned to her, and in her daughter-in-law's eyes was something wild, uncontrolled. Yes, I hate you. I hate you because you never accepted me, because you always treated me like an intruder, because he always chose you over me, always his perfect little mommy, above everything and everyone. I just wanted you to stop existing the way you did. I wanted you weak, dependent, silenced. Dr. Miller spoke, his voice grave. Ma'am, what you've done is very serious. You kept this woman sedated, intentionally caused muscle atrophy, psychological isolation. This is elder abuse. It's a crime. Robert turned to Patricia, and she had never seen that expression on his face before. You're getting out of this house, now, today, and I will be taking all necessary legal action. You hurt my mother, you held her prisoner, and I will never forgive you for it. Patricia didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there, leaning against the wall, her mask completely shattered, revealing the emptiness behind it. Robert took out his phone and called Maria. Help my wife pack her bags. She's leaving today, and then come stay with my mother. Maria appeared at the door almost instantly, as if she had been waiting for that moment. Yes, sir, excuse me, Mrs. Patricia, shall we? Robert's ex-wife stumbled out of the room like someone waking from a nightmare only to find reality was worse. Robert knelt beside his mother, taking her cold, trembling hands. It's over, Mom. It's over. Helen began to cry, deep sobs of relief and accumulated pain. Dr. Miller placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. I'm going to refer her for physical therapy immediately. With proper treatment, she can regain much of her mobility, and I will document all of this for the legal proceedings. Robert nodded, unable to speak. He held his mother as she cried, feeling the weight of months of neglect fall upon his shoulders. But he also felt for the first time in a long time that he had done the right thing, that he had protected the one who needed protecting, and that, even if it was late, he had seen the truth, the horrible, painful, but necessary truth, because only the truth could free them from the prison of lies the mansion had become. The afternoon settled over the Upper East Side mansion, bringing with it a different kind of silence. It was no longer that oppressive quiet, heavy with secrets and fear. It was a silence of waiting, of pause, as if the house itself were taking its first breath after months of holding it. Robert sat beside his mother's bed, watching Dr. Miller make the final notes on her chart. Helen had taken a mild sedative prescribed by the doctor and was now sleeping peacefully, her breathing finally even, without the anxious flutter that had become her trademark. "I'll schedule physical therapy sessions 3 times a week," Dr. Miller said, packing his stethoscope into his bag. The doctor looked tired, aged by the morning's revelations. "And I'll prescribe some vitamin supplements. She's malnourished, Robert. Not critically, but enough to be concerning. The combination of homemade sedatives and lack of movement has caused damage that will take time to reverse. But she's strong. She'll recover." "How long?" Robert's voice was hoarse with contained emotion. The doctor sighed. "With dedication and the right care. A few months to regain basic strength in her legs. Maybe 6 months to walk without assistance again. But Robert, the psychological damage could take longer. She was betrayed by someone who was supposed to care for her. That leaves deep scars. Consider finding a therapist who specializes in elder trauma." Robert nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He only managed to murmur a thank you as the doctor stood to leave. "I'll leave you my personal number. Anything, anytime, just call me." "And Robert," the doctor paused at the door, "you did the right thing. Many sons wouldn't have had the courage to see what was right in front of them. You saved your mother." "Did I save her?" Robert thought after the doctor left. "Or did I just wake up too late?" The guilt was a constant weight in his chest, a presence that wouldn't let him breathe properly. How had he allowed this to happen? How had he been so blind? The sound of suitcases being dragged down the hall pulled him from his thoughts. Patricia was leaving. Robert stood and went to the door of his mother's room, watching from a distance. His ex-wife, because that's what she was now, no longer had any of that studied elegance. Her hair was loose and disheveled, her makeup smeared, her eyes swollen. She was carrying 2 large suitcases, with Maria beside her carrying another. She looked like a shadow of her former self, a ghostly version of the perfect woman she had been. Patricia looked up and her eyes met Robert's. For a moment, just one moment, he saw something human in that gaze. Regret, pain, or just anger at being caught. It was hard to tell. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but then seemed to think better of it, and closed it. She walked down the stairs in silence, her suitcases thudding against the steps with a dull, final sound. The front door closed with a soft click. Patricia was gone. She had left the mansion without a look back, without an apology, without any explanation beyond that bitter outburst of resentment. Robert felt a strange relief, mixed with a profound sadness. 12 years of marriage ending like this, in a crash of painful truths and revealed lies. But at the same time, he knew it was necessary. Some things, once broken, couldn't be fixed. And trust was one of them. "Mr. Anderson," Maria appeared beside him, her voice soft. "I've prepared the guest room next to Mrs. Helen's. I thought you might want to stay close tonight." Robert turned to her, seeing silent tears streaming down the housekeeper's face. "Thank you, Maria, and thank you for having the courage to tell me. You saved my mother. I don't know how I can ever thank you." She shook her head. "I should have told you sooner, sir. I should have been braver. I was so afraid of losing my job, of causing trouble, that I let that woman hurt Mrs. Helen. It's my fault, too." Robert took her hands in his. "It's not. The fault is mine, for letting this happen in my own house, and Patricia's for doing it. You did what you could at the right time, and I'm grateful. I will always be grateful." Maria wiped her tears and nodded, returning to her duties with her shoulders a little lighter. Robert went back into his mother's room and sat in the chair beside the bed. Helen was still asleep, but her face looked more relaxed than he had seen it in months. Without that constant tension around her eyes, without the worried frown. She looked at peace. Night fell slowly over New York City. Robert didn't leave the room. Maria brought dinner on a tray, but he barely touched the food. He could only sit there watching his mother sleep, as if he were afraid that if he blinked, she would disappear, as if this were all just a nightmare from which he would eventually wake. But it wasn't. It was real. Painfully, brutally real. Around 11 o'clock, Helen began to stir. She opened her eyes slowly, disoriented at first, until her gaze met Robert's. "Son." Her voice was weak, but without the fear that had become so common. "You're still here." He leaned in, taking her hand. "I am. And I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stay here with you for as long as it takes." "Is she really gone?" Helen asked, her voice just a whisper. "Patricia, did she leave?" Robert nodded. "She's gone, and she's not coming back, ever. I'm going to take care of you now, Mom. The way I always should have." Helen closed her eyes, tears streaming down her temples. "I was so scared, Robert. So scared you wouldn't believe me, that you'd think I was exaggerating, making things up out of jealousy or because I'm old. I believe you, Mom. I will always believe you. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. I'm sorry I left you alone with her. I'm sorry for everything." Helen squeezed his hand with what little strength she had. "You didn't know. She was good at hiding it, good at lying. Even I doubted myself sometimes. I thought I was getting confused, that maybe I really did need that rest, those medicines. That's how it works, son. When someone who is supposed to care for you starts to hurt you, you start to doubt your own sanity." Robert felt a sharp pang in his chest. This was abuse, pure and simple, and it had happened under his own roof. "Never again, Mom. This will never happen again." Helen gave a faint smile. "I know. Because now your eyes are open, and that makes all the difference." They sat in silence for a long moment, just holding hands, letting the quiet of the night envelop them like a blanket. The following days were a period of adjustment and discovery. Discovery of how much damage Patricia had caused, but also of how much strength Helen still had, hidden beneath her apparent weakness. On the second day, with help from Robert and Maria, she managed to take 3 steps while leaning on them. 3 steps that were celebrated as if they were a marathon. On the 3rd day, she managed to stand for a full minute without trembling so much. On the 4th day, she asked to sit on the terrace to feel the sun on her face, and when she did, she cried with relief and gratitude. Dr. Miller came every day, monitoring her progress, adjusting medications, bringing equipment to help with her rehabilitation. And slowly, very slowly, Helen began to come back. Not as the woman she was before. That woman would probably never return, but as a stronger, more conscious version, a survivor. Robert changed too. He began working from home most of the time, setting up his office in a room on the ground floor to always be nearby. He made a point of having lunch and dinner with his mother every day, of listening to her, really listening, when she spoke. And he discovered, to his surprise, that he had wasted so much time, that during all those years focused on work, he had missed out on precious conversations, laughter, stories. But now he had a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. Maria became more than an employee. She became part of the family, a silent but constant guardian. It was she who suggested that Helen start doing small activities to regain her fine motor skills. Knitting, crossword puzzles, painting. Simple things that made a huge difference, and it was she who, one afternoon, found Helen crying in the garden. Not from sadness, but from pure joy at finally being able to walk there on her own, with only a cane for support. A month after Patricia left, Robert received a letter from her lawyer. Patricia was filing for divorce and demanding a portion of his fortune. It mentioned nothing about what she had done to Helen, obviously, but Robert had been expecting it. He had his own lawyer ready with all the medical documentation, the notebook, the bottle of sedative and witnesses. If she wanted a fight, she would get one, but she wouldn't get anything more than her legal and minimal share. And if she tried to slander him or his mother, he had enough evidence to sue for elder abuse. His lawyer made that very clear in the response. Patricia didn't reply. She accepted the terms of the divorce in silence, took what was hers, and disappeared from their lives as completely as she had entered years ago. Robert heard rumors months later that she had moved to Miami to start a new life. Part of him felt relief. Another part felt a residual sadness for the waste of it all. But mostly, he felt gratitude for having found out in time. Because it could have been worse, much worse. 3 months after that night of revelations, Helen took her first steps completely on her own. It was a Sunday morning, with the sun streaming through the living room windows. Robert was reading the paper when he heard the footsteps, slow, careful, but independent. He looked up and saw his mother walking toward him, without a cane, without support, just with that fierce expression of determination on her wrinkled face. "Look at me, son," she said when she reached him, her eyes shining with pride and emotion. "I'm walking. I'm really walking." Robert dropped the paper and stood up, hugging her carefully but with enough force to show how proud he was. "You are, Mom. You're walking. And you're free. Finally. Free." Maria appeared at the living room door, saw the scene and began to cry, crying with joy, with relief, with a deep happiness that only someone who has witnessed suffering can truly understand when they see recovery. The three of them stood there, in the sun-drenched room, celebrating that small victory that was, in fact, an immense one. A victory over control, over abuse, over the silence that had dominated that house for so long. The months turned into seasons. Summer gave way to fall, which gave way to winter. Helen continued to improve. She went back to her walks in the garden, back to making some decisions about the house, back to smiling, without that fear always present in her eyes. And Robert learned to be truly present. He learned that fortune and professional success meant nothing if the people you loved were suffering. He learned to pay attention to the signs, to ask questions, to not assume everything was fine just because it seemed to be. One evening, almost a year after that transformative revelation, Robert and Helen were sitting on the terrace, watching the lights of New York City twinkle in the distance. It had been a year since their lives had completely changed, a year since the truth had come out. "Are you happy, Mom?" Robert asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Helen thought for a moment before answering. "I am. Not in the way I was before all this happened, that naive happiness of someone who thinks they're safe. But I'm happy in a different way, a more conscious way, more grateful. Every day I wake up and can walk, every meal I eat without fear, every night I sleep peacefully, is a blessing. And I don't take any of it for granted anymore." "Me neither, Mom. Me neither." Robert took her hand, and they sat there in silence, letting the night envelop them. A peaceful night, with no secrets, no lies. Just a mother and son, survivors of a storm that had nearly destroyed them, but that in the end, in a strange and painful way, had made them stronger. It had shown them the true value of the things that really mattered: family, truth, freedom. The mansion on the Upper East Side was no longer a prison. It was a home where the windows were left open, where laughter echoed through the halls, where silence, when it came, was welcome and not feared. And every morning as the sun rose over the city, it brought with it a renewed promise, the promise that the worst was behind them, that better days were not just possible but were real, that true love, the kind that protects and cares, had triumphed over control, disguised as care. And Robert knew, with a certainty that warmed his heart, that he would never be complacent again. He would never again close his eyes to the suffering around him. Because he had learned, in the hardest way possible, that sometimes the worst things happen in silence, inside our own homes, perpetrated by the people who are supposed to love us, and that the only way to fight it was to be present, to be aware, to be willing to see the truth no matter how painful it was. In the end, it wasn't about the mansion on the Upper East Side, or about fortunes or social status. It was about something much simpler and infinitely more valuable. It was about dignity, about respect, about the basic right of every human being to live without fear in their own home. And as Robert watched his mother smile at the city lights, finally free, he knew that this was a lesson he would carry with him forever. A lesson paid for with tears and guilt, but one that was worth every second of pain. Because in the end, he had saved what truly mattered. He had saved his mother, and in the process, he had saved himself. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert, Helen, and Maria has touched your hearts deeply. If you are moved by this journey of courage, truth, and rebirth, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what part of this story resonated with you the most. How many people at this very moment are suffering in silence inside their own homes, waiting for someone to finally see what's happening? Every day we bring you intense narratives like this one, which reveal the deepest and truest side of the human soul, stories that make us reflect on our own lives and choices. Your participation keeps these stories alive and inspires us to continue. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you think about the true meaning of love, family, and freedom.